Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Workday Chats today. I'm Anke Morgannon, your host for today's discussion. And today I'm joined by Anita Ledke, Future of Work speaker and author, and Pete Tiriakis, Principal Analyst and Advisor at 360 Insight. Everyone in payroll is looking at streamlining their payroll investments globally. There's so much talk about digital transformation, technology innovation, and vendor consolidation, and payroll is right in the mix of the discussion. I'm excited to take some time today to talk about some practical examples of helping organizations with their global payroll needs and to hear from our experts about what payroll leaders can do to minimize cost, risk, and accelerate value in these areas. Now, starting with you, Pete. You worked with many organizations around the world. Why is payroll so important to organizations, and what are some of the challenges?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anke, for having me, and it's great to be here with Anita as well. I'm a big fan of Anita's. We've worked together before, and it's just it's a privilege for us both to be on the same session together. So I'm excited to learn and share. So, yeah, look, I mean, I think payroll. Payroll has always been important, and it's always been a difficult thing to deal with, right? I think that certainly in recent years, the employee conversation has come up, right? Certainly the employee experience conversation around payroll, and the fact that I like to say that it sits at the heart of the employee experience, right? It really does hold the trust between an employer and an employee. It's right. It's why we all come to work, right? To get paid, regardless of the lens of what we're trying to get paid for. I joke that my daughter comes to work for her dog. So, for me, it's different, right? I have a family to take care of. So for me, that's my lens. But look, we're all coming for the same reason, and pay is a massive piece of that. And certainly for most companies, it's the largest expense, right? And critical, right? Holding on to that trust with employees. But I think that there are complexities that are deeper to payroll that go way beyond, the employee experience, right? The employee experience is almost easy if you can get the other parts and pieces of the blocking and tackling, as I like to call it, right. And so I think where we are now is, I think a lot of organizations are facing challenges in two folds, right? I think all organizations are facing more and more complexity around compliance, right? These things are coming faster, they're coming more complex, they're becoming more challenging to handle. And as you scale into other countries, that becomes compounded to where you're almost talking the moving target in a lot of cases. And then when you think about the fact that, payroll hasn't necessarily always been the first thing organizations look to go and spend money on, right? It's largely been a cost center. And good enough was good enough, right? I mean, if it wasn't broken, let's don't touch it. And I think there were a lot of firms that have woken up to the realization that their platforms and their operating models for payroll aren't necessarily as mature or as advanced as maybe some of the investments they've made in HR, but yet incredibly critical. I like to call payroll sort of the tires on the race car, right? If you can have all the best machinery, right? You can have the best technology, you can have the best people, but if you're on, you've got that race car on some cheap tires, it's not going to pivot and handle. And I think that's sort of the way I look at payroll in a lot of ways. It helps the company sort of pivot around those corners and handle, right? And handle the organization's scale and breadth and where it's trying to go strategically. So I think there's two major pieces here that companies are really struggling with, and one is just the infrastructure, right? Trying to make it on a less than modern operating model is not going to put that payroll in a position to be what it really can be and provide that strategic value through its data and insights. And of course, it's gonna fumble that employee experience. So I think those are kind of the key things right now, is compliance and just modernization, right? Having the right tools to help them compete when it comes to payroll, right? And have a robust experience for both the business and the employee.
That's great. And Anita, now to you. You've been seen as a futurist for people leaders and recently published an article, Why Location Matters When Paying Remote Employees. Can you give some examples? And, Pete mentioned compliance and the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So my article was really inspired by some posts on LinkedIn that basically said, it does not matter where employees live, we should pay them all the same. And of course, in a perfect world, we should. We should pay people based on what they deliver, based on the output. But the reality of the matter is that living standards throughout the world are different. And so what people can pay for a certain service or a certain product is also different. And that means that you have to adjust. And the other question that I always ask first in these types of debates are we talking about independence or are we talking about employees? Because independence sends you an invoice and you have to check some of that. Like, are they an official business? Do they pay their taxes? That's fine. But when it comes to employees, as an employer, you have a lot of obligations. And those obligations differ based on where an employee lives. And that means that if an employee moves and you don't know about it, well, the first thing that happens is you probably pay the wrong taxes, and then and potentially Social Security. But the second thing is that once an employee moves for a longer period of time, and typically that is about 183 days, then it's very likely that that employee falls under the legislative umbrella of the country where they live. And then suddenly that could mean that you as an employer have to establish residency. You might even have to establish a legal entity with everything that comes with it. So knowing where your employee lives, making sure that they don't move without you knowing it, is absolutely critical when it comes to paying people correctly and being in compliance with local legislation, local taxation, and a host of other things like benefits and pensions. So for the foreseeable future, yes, an employee can move, but yes, the employer needs to know about it, and it could potentially lead to a dismantling of the contract.
Yeah, exactly. Many organizations, they have kind of back to office policies, and then they offer hybrid work, right? And an organization suddenly, it's like, oh my, employees are everywhere in the world. The distances have become shorter and they don't know. It's like, where are you today? Where are you tomorrow? And now back to you, Pete. You wrote a lot about technology innovation and data. Why is innovation so important to payroll and then knowing where everyone is?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, to add on to what Anita was talking about, one of the things I noticed in my research is more and more often organizations are having to go and start to compete for talent in locations they never thought they would be maybe operating in. And they're finding themselves, even at a younger and younger maturity level, in a multi-country situation where that wasn't the case maybe before COVID or prior. So it's absolutely thrust a lot of conversation around this. But I think for payroll, why innovation is so important. I think it's been starved for a long time, right? I talked earlier about the fact that I think a lot of companies kicked that can down the road and said, well, payroll's getting out the door. Why should we touch it? I've literally sat in front of business leaders that took that mindset, over the past years, and now I think they've recognized that it is, in fact, an agility enabler, right? I mean, payroll holds some tremendous data. Often it's the most accurate data in the organization, right? Who do we call first when we have a change in our lives? We generally go to payroll. That's where the rubber meets the road, as we talked about. So I think what you're looking at now is the idea that you're going to be, a lot of firms have already solved for their core HR. They're starting to look at other areas of their business. They're setting that on top of very outdated infrastructure for payroll, and I think they recognize it's necessary to bring that in line and actually bring that innovation. Right, payroll has been so very manual. Right, it's been the ticking and tying of the past of manually addressing data anomalies and corrective actions during your payroll process that That doesn't necessarily need to be the case anymore, right? Artificial intelligence, even just RPA in the past was a tremendous blessing to payroll, knocking down a lot of that manual effort and manual data entry and maintaining of the system, to now where it's much more augmentative and guided, right? Bringing those insights to the payroll practitioner to allow them to activate that data for the business. And I think when you think about what that data can do when you bring it to other data, right? Operational data or other very, Anita's very keen to the compensation data, right? If you could bring those things together, you start to get a very good picture of what really is going on in the organization. And I think there were a lot of firms during COVID that were in this moment where maybe they didn't have the best workforce insights. Maybe they didn't know where people were or what they were paying them, and that's a big piece of what payroll can offer, right? Is that data and insights to be paired with other data and insights that can then give the company that agility advantage to see around the next corner. And when payroll can activate that and has the ability to remove all that manual minutia and allow them to focus their time on more value-added tasks, you start to see the impact they can make on things like mergers and acquisitions or broad org redesigns, or various different things to bring about process improvement. So there's a tremendous amount of value that is sitting in payroll that has to be unlocked through innovation and its data. And once it is, it can be a real robust agility enabler for the business.
So payroll always has to follow the organization, right? It doesn't matter what changes occur. And you said, do you want to chime in and maybe elaborate a little bit on the compensation and, financial well-being? I think is important to everyone around the world right now.
Yeah, and especially the financial well-being is a topic that is coming front and center more and more. I think what we saw during the pandemic, in the first year, it was everyone works from home, or a lot of people work from home. And we were focused on mental health and making sure that people were relatively safe, and also that they could work in good circumstances and were guided and helped under very, under a very unclear timing of how long this was going on. And then in the second half of the pandemic, we started to see, or I started to observe in my research, that investors were funding more and more compensation and financial well-being solutions. And that told me that they had spotted early on this trend of companies to now venture over into the personal space of the employee, into the financial health, because we slowly started to realize that financial problems often cause mental health issues. Because if you're worried about paying your bills, you cannot bring your best self to work. You are sitting there and you're constantly thinking about, how am I going to get my bills paid? And it has also become more accepted that we do that. Before the pandemic, I was, as an employer, I could not talk about the financial situation, the personal financial situations of employees. Now that has become more normalized. And I think that is a good thing, because we can take into account not only what a person earns in terms of salary, but we're also slowly starting to open up access to other type of benefits and compensation, and creating these whole overviews of total compensation. What does a person actually earn, but also allowing them to make some changes based on their personal circumstances. If you're young, you need to buy a house, you're probably more interested in getting in as much money as you can. And once you get a couple of dependents, you probably pay more attention to healthcare or daycare options or those types of situations. And of course, you see the book behind me. We're getting into a much more regulated situation around pay, where governments across the world, and I think the European Union is a little bit ahead, but you also see this in more and more states in the United States, in Australia, and in other countries around the world, where there's really a focus on equal pay for equal work. And not only from a gender perspective, but also from, for instance, an age perspective or a cultural background perspective. So the focus on what do people earn from a salary perspective is now expanded into what do they get in other elements like compensation, benefits. Does everyone have equal access, for instance, to bonuses or to stock options? And when you put that all together, I'm going to bring it back to those core payroll professionals that have to all combine these elements and make sure that they are processed correctly. And that is, I think, ties into what Pete just mentioned. If you are on a very traditional payroll system, that is going to be super hard because you have to pull all that data together. You have to understand where this is going. You need modern solutions to do that, and also to accurately report back to the management of your company that, yes, we do have equal pay. And yes, we can support this by this and this data from this and this, these and these systems. Right? It's all reliable, and that means that we are in compliance with a new local legislation that is coming.
Wonderful. So, Pete, you already had mentioned insights and data is important. And I kind of want to go back first to the employee and then to the payroll practitioner. So what does an employee expect? I mean, I know everyone has, mobile phone. And what do they want to see on the phone?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think from the employee perspective, the data is incredibly impactful as well, right? I mean, we're talking about from the business side, it's much more compliance, it's much more insights into how things are operating and metrics that they can use to improve and hopefully advance their position as an org. But I think for the employee, that is equally as important, right? When you think about I mentioned transparency earlier, right? And trust. This is what I think, I mean, we talked a lot about, just different lenses here around pay and other things that all, and financial wellness, right? That all comes from, I would say, the different generations that you have in the workforce and how they're all engaging with these different issues, right? Financial wellness looks very different for very different generations, particularly in terms of how they've been raised and where they're from and what their, what their connection to money is. And one of the things I'm finding more and more I'm realizing more and more is that we don't all have access to money in the same way, right? So we bring that financial wellness picture, I think, differently, in each way. And in that same way, employees, I think, look at their data like that as well, right? They're putting it through whatever lens makes sense for their personal needs or generational needs. But I think the value for the employee experience is tremendous in that now we can start to surface information to the employees to give them much better decision-making, right? Much better education, much better awareness for what their money is, where it's coming from, how they're earning it, and where it's going, and how it can impact their lives. So I think you have this certainly this consumerized expectation that we're all living in with our mobile phones, right? We want everything now, if not yesterday, and we want it to be perfect and in our fingertips as and when we want it. But when it comes to something like payroll, there's no compromise, right? There's no 99.9%. It's all or nothing. And I think that's the expectations employees have. And I think all employees now, by way of that consumerization and mobile, have an expectation that things are going to be transparent, that it's going to be very on demand, and then it's going to be 100% accurate and hopefully give them guidance, right? And the did you know? And think about it this way, and if you took this action, sort of guidance, I think those things are going to be incredibly valuable for enabling things like financial wellness, but also helping employees understand their pay in a way that prevents them from having to call payroll and field those calls that are going to be largely about information that they can access on their own. And so I think that there's a lot more self-service happening today. I think there's a lot more of empowerment happening today. And employees generally want that, right? They want to be able to see their data, they see their information, see their pay, and understand how it's connected to the rest of the employee experience and their own personal journey. So I think there's just a general expectation of that on-demand, always on, always available information. And the lovely thing is I think we're getting more surfaced insights to help people make better financial decisions and outcomes.
Yeah, very true. And, employees want this insight, the the transparency and the type kind of
you deserve it.
Talent management and careers and, frontline worker. Maybe, they want to have the insight if I work a different job or a different, shift that is offered. And, suddenly the pay goes up or maybe goes down.
Maybe it hasn't, yeah.
They have the insight and feel empowered, right? And when they enter data, then the data is also more accurate. And then, of course, we need to talk about AI, right?
Oh, yeah.
Anita, you have written about AI quite a bit. And now looking at the payroll, practitioners or anyone, else, it's like data, insights, it's all connected. So maybe you can share a little bit about, how you see it.
Yeah, because the example that you just gave, an employee deciding which shift they should take is actually a really good example, because now they sort of take this shift based on, does this fit my time frame? Or how do I have that day off so I can take that shift? But in future, what will happen is that AI will actually advise that employee and say, hey, if you take this shift, your wages this month will actually be like 20% higher because there's overtime and there's this and you have a right to that. So take this shift because that is very advantageous for you. And from the other perspective, what that AI can also do is make sure that that employee does not subscribe to or volunteer for a shift where they potentially violate the working hours in a day or in a week. Now, that is currently often done by rules behind the scenes, but in future that will change. So I think that currently there is a lot of focus on generative AI helping the employee through chatbots and all that kind of stuff, but what I think actually has a lot more potential for HR is when AI comes in and starts to help HR and payroll professionals. Because think about it, currently when a chatbot is involved, an HR professional or a payroll professional isn't. And so when you replace that by AI, it does not mean that anything changes in the workload of an HR or payroll professional. But where you can actually start to use AI, for instance, in payroll in a very good way, is when you are starting to see discrepancies and anomalies in your current month. And you can start to work with AI to understand that it slowly learns what is good and what is wrong. And then the advantage of it is that it can do that so much quicker because AI can process everything at the same time, where we as humans do that sequentially. And so you will have time savings because, first of all, AI already knows the answer because you've done this 100 times, you've approved this 100 times. So, and the next 1,000 times it will automatically be approved for you because there's nothing different around this. And then secondly, it will also be able to survey the exceptions that it has never seen and ask you, okay, now what is the solution in this case? And then once it has learned that, it will automatically apply that learning to every time it encounters that problem in future. So by and by, you will see that you as a payroll professional will get more in control of what AI does and help them to do the work for you instead of doing it yourself. And now you might think, hey, wait a minute, that's not a good thing because it means that my job is not needed in future anymore. But I think it's slightly different because we all know that currently we already have a shortage of payroll professionals in a lot of countries. And no one wakes up one day or finishes high school and thinks, yeah, I'm going to be a payroll professional. This is actually the ultimate goal of my life. I'm going to pay people. So the problem is that we already don't have enough payroll professionals going into this career. And that means that if you as a payroll professional are able to manage more payrolls at the same time because AI helps you do some of that stuff, that helps us deal with the payroll professional shortage that we're already witnessing in a lot of locations. So from that perspective, I'm fairly optimistic about the use of AI. But Pete, really interested to see what you think about this.
Yeah, I would agree. Interestingly, on my podcast, we asked this question: how did you get into the HR or payroll world, and why do you stay? And you'd be surprised how many people say, I needed a job, and they go and they end up landing in entry-level HR and payroll spaces. And thankfully that they do, and thankfully that they stay, right? It's a blessing. So no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think this has been a major area where payroll has largely been a manual process, right? Very much. I think back to my days as a payroll leader, we did so many things manual. This stuff is a blessing, right? Seeing all of this innovation, and payroll's largely been operating with one arm behind its back. And I think that's where some of the trust for the data hasn't been as robust as it could be, because it had to be manually cobbled together, or it wasn't as agile and nimble as it needed to be. We recently did a study with one of Workday's partners and the payroll org, and we found 64% of global payroll operations are unfit to handle the strategic direction of their business. So if you digest that for a moment, that means more than 2/3 of global payroll operations are unprepared for whatever their company wants to take on. Again, maybe that's a merger and acquisition. Maybe that's an expansion to another country. Maybe it's just growth wherever they are. That's a problem. And that's going to hold the business back from, again, back to that agility and scalability and resiliency. Payroll has to have that, and they can't do that in a manual environment where they're ticking and tying and potentially making mistakes. They're all humans. And this ability now to take away and augment them and put in front of them the anomalies to go and address, and give them more time back to use that data to take action and help the company move itself forward it's an absolute blessing.
Good, Pete. And I can understand, there's so much talk and it can be scary, but maybe when, everyone has some cool gadgets and they have the insight and becomes better even for the payroll practitioner. And having that said, I want to wrap up the question. So can you both share with the audience the most important advice for the future of global payroll? Anita?
I think that when you look at the future of global payroll, it is super important to confirm to your management that your payroll is secure and compliant. It is it's item number 1. And then the second thing, and this has not changed from all my time that I have been in global payroll, if your payroll is not accurate and if it is not timely, everything in HR stops. Your talent program can be great, your compensation can be wonderful, but if people are not getting what they earn at the time they expected, they start looking for another job, especially if it happens again and again. So the rules in payroll, or the focus in payroll, really does not change, but you can do it better if you make use of more modern technology. So my advice to everyone would be, take a good look of what is out there right now and see how it can improve your payroll delivery, because that will help you. But more importantly, it will help everyone in your organization.
Thank you, Anita. And Pete?
Yeah, look, I've been saying this a lot, but I think it's absolutely the golden age of payroll right now, right? We're living in a phenomenal time. I think it's a better time than ever to be a payroll professional. You have more help and more technology on the way, and I say, lean in, right? Lean into that augmentation and look at what it can do for your process, what it can do for your activating your data, and what it can do for the organization. I've been floating around the chart that the World Economic Forum shows on the skills of the future, right? The skills that organizations are more likely to emphasize over the next 5 years. And if you look at those skills, it's largely things like adaptability, creativity, right? Certainly system awareness and system, knowledge, analytic thinking, right? all the things that you would see on a payroll leader's, a payroll manager's job description, right? And I think that paired with the rich data that payroll has at its disposal and that it's curating, when you activate that with technology and all of those great skills, I think the payroll leaders of tomorrow, or of today, really are prepared for tomorrow in spades. They have fantastic skills that are really going to shine, and I think the profession is going to really move away from this sort of processor, ticking and tying, down in the basement printing check viewpoint to more of a strategic advisor, more of a consultant to the business, driving them towards a better business outcome. So all the things Anita said, and really just lean in, right? Lean in, embrace it, and ride this wave, because I think you're going to see payroll go to a whole different level within the ecosystem of HCM, and I'm excited for that.
Thank you for sharing your insights, both of you, Pete and Anita. I really, really appreciate your time. And if you're interested, thank you. If you're interested in learning more about the latest payroll innovation, join us at Workday Rising in Barcelona this week and check out the registration link in the comments. And there is, a lot of on-demand available as well. And be sure to tune into our next episode of Workday Chats and have a great work day and payroll day. Thank you.